Every one of us will face in our lifetime loss, failure, setbacks. But why is loss and setbacks part of life? Why is it so necessary? What do you do when obstacles come your way? How can you redefine a seemingly negative situation into a positive one? Please join me in a new 4-part course, Dealing with Loss and Failure, the Chassidic approach to coping with challenges and setbacks. In it, we will learn not just how to deal with loss, but how to transform it into an asset and a catalyst for growth. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson here. This is the beginning, the first part of a 4-part new course, Dealing with Loss and Failure, the Chassidic approach to coping with challenges and setbacks. In this first part, we will be addressing the psychological approach. In part 2, which will be next Monday, the spiritual dynamics. Part 3, the following Monday, how to not be your own worst enemy. And in part 4, the following Monday after that, how to help others deal with failure. There's no one in this world, and no one that ever existed, that did not face some form of setback in life. Some loss, some failure, due to mistakes, deliberate ones, not deliberate ones, due to other things that may have happened, not in our control. And the initial reaction would seem to be, okay, some of us get very hurt, very, very bitter, very demoralized. Some of us just move on, and some become stronger in those broken places. In this course, we're going to discuss it thoroughly from the Chassidic perspective, which is essentially a spiritual perspective. But we'll call it a psycho-spiritual approach, because it's psychological and spiritual all combined. In this first part, we're going to take 4 different lessons from history and glean from them, derive from them messages, a formula for our challenges today. This particular course is not dealing with tragedy and death per se, but really with the challenges that we go through in life that may not be that traumatic, but still can be traumatic in its own way. But the truth is, these lessons can be applied to any situation. So, let us begin. Well, we've already begun, but let us dive into it. We have to keep in mind that whenever we're faced with any given situation that challenges us, that makes us uncomfortable, we're dealing here not with some objective, cognitive challenge, but we're also dealing with an emotional one. Our emotions come into play. As soon as something doesn't work out the way we like, and not due to anything wrong with us, we're emotional about it. We're subjective. We feel disappointed. We feel weakened. We feel vulnerable, exposed, betrayed. So why is this so vital? Because emotions can serve us well, but they could also block us. Because when you get overwhelmed emotionally, you can't think straight. So it's hard to make good decisions. Like if something happens, a certain setback, you planned a party. There's an outdoor party. It starts to rain. And you planned it. So the first thing we do is panic. What do? Do we cancel the guests, the catering? What you want to do is be able to step back and say, 1 second, let me think this through. Let me get through my options. Emotions tend to take control, and we often make mistakes. Now, this is not a critique of emotions. It's just critical that we human beings have emotions. But it's important to know it, because the more you're aware of it, the more you can look at it. So in the general approach, the Chassidic approach to dealing with challenges and setbacks, with loss and failure, is vital that when something does happen, you don't just react. You step back. In other words, we're not looking for a short-term fix. Even though you may need a short-term fix for the immediate, to stop the bleeding or to create balance and regain an equilibrium. But you're also looking for the longer term, to look at the bigger picture. You don't want to do something and then later regret what you did. Very often, any type of loss, failure, any type of setback will trigger something. You do something and then you say, oh, I should have done it differently. So you want to contain the setback and not turn it into a bigger monster. That's why this is so vital. And when you're able to do that, which is really the concept that Chassidus addresses, called Moyach Shalat Al-Alev, in Tanya, chapter 12, the magnum opus of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liability, chapter 12, he talks about self-control, that we have natural inherent self-control, that though we can be emotional, and though we can have an impulse, and it could be drawing us and tempting us, but we have the capacity to reflect, to step back. And we see this all the time. Now, of course, very overwhelming situations make it more difficult, but to say we don't have the capacity, we do have the capacity. Very simply put, something happens to you when you're in private, you can have a tantrum. If you're somewhat of a dignified adult, you're not going to have the tantrum in the middle of the street or in public. Some people can't control themselves, but we see from that you have self-control. Now you can say, well, I'm only controlling my external reaction and not really controlling it internally, but it doesn't matter. At least you've done that. Then there's the next level of how do you control internally, which is, of course, what we're going to discuss. So that's point number one. Point number two that's vital to address is that it really comes down to almost being tested. It's like when things are going normally, we rely on our regular resources. You don't need to be ingenious. You don't need to use your ingenuity or creativity or find some unique solution. Things are going smoothly. When there's a challenge, and it's not the way you planned it, that's a good way to put it. You didn't plan it. So there are two things that could happen. You can resist the setback. You can resist it and just fight it, or allow it to demoralize you, or become creative. How am I going to get around this obstacle? So it really is a test of what we have within us. And we can't know until we're tested, until we're challenged. Like they say, you don't know how strong you are, like a tea bag. You don't know how strong it is until you put it into hot water. Hot water, this little innocent tea bag comes alive. And the same is with all obstacles. You build a dam. The water is rushing. It hits the dam. So you don't know how powerful the water is, but the dam, the resistance, the water starts building up and building up and building up until what? It breaks right through. And it takes the dam with it. Who would have known that the water has such power? Only the resistance created it. So that's point number two, to understand those dynamics. And that is indeed the reason that life has loss and failure. It's not because there's loss and failure, it's because it's resistance that is challenging us to dig deeper and find our innermost resources. To be like that water that rushes through, like that tea bag that suddenly releases its energy. In the words of the Talmud, you don't know how strong an olive is. Well, I was going to say a tea bag. And that an olive produces oil only when it's pressed, when it's pressured. That's when it produces oil. So that's point number two that's vital to know. And point number three, which perhaps is the most important one of all, is who are you? Are you a product of your circumstances? Or some would call it a victim of circumstances? Or do you have within yourself the ability to define your circumstances? To define your destiny? Because circumstances, I correct myself, sometimes we don't control them. But we control our attitude. So many of us become products of what happens to us. But you're not a product of what happens to you. You are a self-contained entity, a soul, a divine soul that has all the power you need to deal with anything that will come your way. Which is really point number 4, but it's part of point number 3. And what's that point? That there's no challenge that's given to you that you don't have the strength to deal with. But that's an extension of because you have that soul. The more you can come in touch with that soul, the more you build confidence. So whatever comes your way, you can navigate. To use the analogy of a swimmer. The difference in a good and bad swimmer is not that the good swimmer can deal with any storm that comes its way, comes his or her way. The difference is the navigation. So when everything is calm, the sea is calm, the water is calm, 2 swimmers, they're swimming. Yeah, maybe you could see a good swimmer by the way they swim, better, faster, smoother. But then the storm strikes. What happens? The bad swimmer, without experience, is going to try to fight the tide to the point that he or she can exhaust himself, drain energy, and God forbid, be in danger. The good swimmer will right away recognize, 1 second, this is a tide, this is a storm I cannot fight. The water is too strong. The good swimmer will stop fighting, will allow himself to float, will navigate the waves, will ride the waves until the storm subsides, and then continue on. You see the difference? They both were faced with the exact same storm, but their attitude was very different based on experience. That's the difference between a good navigator and one that doesn't know how to. So what we're learning in this course is how to navigate. But to navigate properly, you need to have that confidence that you have it within you. Because if you feel that something is stronger than you are, then what's going to ultimately happen is you will succumb. So let's sum up those 4 points. Okay? The first point is the emotions get in the way and they can cloud your judgment. So therefore we need to have that self-control. The next point is that challenges bring out our deeper resources. Like the olive producing oil, like the dam, the resistance that creates more energy. Point number 3 is that you have a soul. That defines you, not your events that happen around you define you. And point number 4 is that anything that comes your way, you have the strength to deal with. So now let's take several case studies in history to demonstrate this and drive the point home. I'm going to begin with the first, in this chronological order, the story of the Jewish people enslaved in Mitzrayim, in Egypt. Now it's interesting, the word Mitzrayim in Hebrew is more than just the name Egypt. It means limitations, boundaries, constraints, everything in life that in some way challenges us. When things are smooth and everything is open, the boundaries are open, we don't feel it. So Mitzrayim reflects any type of loss or failure or challenge or setback, inhibition, fear, insecurity. You can fill in the blanks. The Jewish people now are in this Mitzrayim, psychologically, emotionally, and also physically. What happens? Now in this case, we're dealing with also enslavement, hard labor, genocide. I mean, the challenges were great. So there's a verse right in the beginning of Exodus, of Shmos. Kashayana esam ken yirba v'chen yifritz. As they were oppressed, afflicted, in direct proportion to that, they thrived and they flourished. Exactly the point that we made, that resistance can overwhelm, but it could also make you thrive and flourish. That's exactly what happened. But how? How did they not succumb? How did they not resign themselves? How did they not surrender after such oppression? It's because they had that soul within them. And one of the ways it expresses itself is through faith. So let's analyze the story of one of the horrible decrees that Pharaoh implemented. Was he heard from his stargazers that there will rise among the Jewish people a savior, a male, a man. So his decree was all boys should be thrown into the river Nile, or newborn boys thrown into the river Nile. That way, this boy that would ultimately become the savior would never come to be. The men, the Jewish men, told their wives, you know what, this is terrible. Let's not have children until this decree is over. The women said, what are you talking about? We were promised that we would leave this God-forsaken place. If we don't have children, we'll all die here. What about the decree? We'll find ways. And they did. There were many boys that died, killed, brutally killed. But the women went to the fields, the Talmud tells us, and they found ways to have their children. Of course, the most important one of all, Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, his mother Yocheved, put him in a waterproof basket, the edge of the river Nile, and he was saved that way. He ended up growing up in Pharaoh's home. Talk about transforming liability into an asset. Not only did he grew up in the home that the person who was oppressing the people, and he was the one that would overturn and overthrow him and ultimately free the Jewish people. Overthrow him in the context of the enslaving the Jews. What was it that the women had that the men seemed to have lacked? Faith. That's why it says in the schus, in the merit of the faith of the Jewish women, the Jewish people were released, were freed from Egypt, from Mitzrayim. Faith is the secret to be freed from constraints and from setbacks. Now, many people misunderstand faith. They think it's the absence of reason. No. Faith is beyond reason. It's that unwavering and indestructible commitment to your soul and to your soul's destiny and to the God that gave you that soul. That's stronger than any challenge. That's stronger than any setback and failure. And when you connect with that, they were able to forge ahead. They were able to thrive and flourish. So number one in this formula is understanding that you have something that's stronger than any challenge that comes your way. That's your soul. And that allows you to navigate, but you have to access it. And when you do, it makes you stronger. That which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And what happened at the end? They prevailed. Yes, they suffered greatly. Today we remember how they prevailed. We remember the redemption. We commemorate the negative part, the bitterness at the Seder table. We remember what they went through in order to teach us, and this is point number 5, that the narrative isn't over. No matter where you're at right now, there's a bigger narrative. Because the first 4 points that I made lead you to the bigger narrative. And the bigger narrative is, like we say in the Haggadah. Haggadah means narrative. The greater narrative is exactly that. That the end, the story is Geula, redemption. That's why the Ramban Nachmanides calls the entire book of Exodus. We all call it the book of Exodus. But the first chapter, the first 2.5 chapters are about exile. How do you call the entire book Exodus? He calls it Sefer HaGeula, the book of redemption. Because the narrative, the big picture, is the end of the story. Then you realize what the first part was part. It's like you didn't finish the book. You have to continue reading. And that's point number 5. Case study number 2. It happens a little while after they leave Egypt. And now they come to Mount Sinai, receive the Torah, God's mandate. The marriage between God and the people. What a beautiful day. But unfortunately, 39 days later, without getting into all the reasons and the miscalculations and so on, they build a golden calf. Another setback. Just when everything seems going so well. They build a golden calf, they betray God. Basically adultery, infidelity. And you would think, okay, it's over. No. Moses shatters the tablets very deliberately, because then he could say to God, yes, they deserve to be accountable, but they never received the contract. The 10 commandments were on the tablets. They were never signed. So it wasn't Moses trying to find some cute way out. It was because he understood that every setback has the opportunity for even greater growth. So as painful as it was, and it was terrible, he marches back up on the mountain and he speaks to God, beseeches God, begs God. Yes, they will be accountable for what they did. They received the punishment, but you need to forgive them. Don't tell me start a new nation, begin anew, you give up on them. We can't give up. I need hope. I need forgiveness. And he's not successful for 40 days and 40 nights. After the first 40 days and 40 nights that he receives the law of the Torah, he's on the mountain another 40 days and 40 nights, and he's not successful. He comes down and goes up again on the day of Rosh Chodesh Elul, the beginning of the month of Elul, which is why Elul is the month of compassion. And this time, for another 40 days, finally concludes when? On Yom Kippur. And what happens in Yom Kippur? He gains forgiveness, as we say right after Kol Nidre, that God says to Moses, Salachti kidvarecha. I've forgiven them as you have spoken. Imagine, a human being in history stood up to God. Now what's going on here? If God was going to forgive them, why did he have to put Moses through 80 days of torture? Because in order to be forgiven, you need to dig deeper. And that only we can do. What God was saying, look, I created a system of cause and effect. They did something wrong. You put your hand in fire, it gets burned. Moses said, yeah, but you're God. You created those laws. Yes, that's true, but I don't transcend them. I can transcend them, but the human race, the human structure of existence does not transcend them. I don't suspend the laws of nature. And Moses says, but I need hope. Because as human beings, you've created them flawed. They're not perfect. So yes, they will make mistakes. They have to be accountable, no doubt. We're not in denial here. We're not escaping that. But you need to give me hope. And God gives them the 13 attributes of compassion, the divine attributes, and ultimately forgives. And Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year because it's the day, the birth of hope, the birth of forgiveness, the ability to go beyond a setback, a failure, a loss, and become stronger. Yom Kippur is the ultimate celebration of the soul. So in many ways, the lesson the Jews learned in Mitzrayim a little while earlier, and it's actually 120 days, 170 days from when they left Egypt was Yom Kippur, the first Yom Kippur, now became manifest in a day of atonement, Yom Kippur, the holiest day, because it's a day where we can go beyond any setback and failure and begin anew and become stronger in the process. So Yom Kippur manifests all the 5 elements we've been speaking about that are necessary in coping and dealing with loss and failure, setbacks and challenges. Case study number 3, the Middle Ages. Terrible time for the Jewish people, especially in Europe where the Jews lived. Pogroms, the Inquisition later, the Crusaders earlier, a lot of oppression, expulsions, murders. And yet you see something fascinating that most people are not aware of. Amidst this hell and chaos, not like the calm we have today. With all our challenges today, it doesn't compare. The Jews were living constant fear, constant terror. Any moment can be another attack on them. They'd be forced out of their home, have to protect their children. I mean, you can imagine living 24/7 in that type of climate. And yet, here's what we find. Out of that period in time come thousands of books of scholarship from people like Rashi and the Ramban and the Rambam and the Rashba and the Bali Tosfos. I mean, the list goes on. Both in France, in Germany, in the different countries where the Jews lived. Now, when you read these works, you would think that they would be somewhat disjointed, because living in such circumstances, how could you even have the composure and the presence of mind to be able to write, let alone deep commentary? And yet, you find that if you read these books, you would not have any clue what's going on around them. Today they have this thing called deconstruction literature. You deconstruct books and literature to understand the author, what kind of mother he had, what kind of father, what kind of circumstances he lived in, what challenges. You find hints in his writing. Look in all these books, you won't find any hint, not of bitterness, not of anger, not of, and right now I have to stop. It's this, and it's not one, hundreds. And you say to yourself, if you didn't know better, you'd think they were sitting calmly in some resort and writing commentary on the Bible, the Talmud, on Jewish law. They composed the bulk of what we consider today Torah scholarship under these horrible circumstances. Now, and not every moment they were under attack, but every moment they could be. Where did they get this presence from? And you were talking about people, intelligent people, sensitive people, cared about their families. They were not out of touch. They knew what was happening. They were able to go into that soul, that transcends, that same soul where those women in Egypt did, the same place Moses reached when he went up on the mountain. And they were able also through that be able to transcend in a way. No, of course they protected themselves and did whatever it took, but it didn't define them. Their suffering did not define them. Yes, we're suffering, but we are not sufferers because we come from a greater place. These were people who understood where the soul comes from, a place that's beyond existence. And even when it's here, it's really beyond existence, here to transform this world, no matter how horrible and hostile and terrible it could be, and dark it can be. And they understood there's a bigger narrative. They had faith in the promises that were made. And they also had faith in the future, that ultimately Mashiach would come. And these were not dreams of illusion. These were not just fantasies. This was ingrained in their very being. They were not of this world. We are not of this world. They were able to access it. That's case study number 3. And finally, number 4 is our own recent history, the last century, the Holocaust. Yes, the Holocaust, 6 million, 1/3 of our people were decimated. 1.5 million innocent children. 6 million Jews, approximately. What would that do to any nation? A third of our people. You would think, as all the obituaries were written in 1945, that's all over. Just a matter of time till the older Jews die out, and that's it. The best teachers, leaders, not just communities were completely uprooted forever. People went back after the war, the refugees, nowhere to go to. Nobody wanted them. No family. I mean, everything working against them. And yes, some people remained broken. Everybody remembers what happened. Some people could not rebuild, but nevertheless, the majority did rebuild. Where did they get that strength from? Where did they get that resilience from? So I remember once speaking to Eli Wiesel, who's a good friend of mine, good friend of my father's. I continued the friendship. And other Holocaust survivors. You're in awe when you sit with these people. You stand before them with the numbers on their arms, the anguish in their eyes, the wrinkles. I mean, you could see the pain. You could see the trauma. So I asked him with respect. I said, is it true that when the Jews marched to the gas chambers, they would sing a song called Ani Mamin, I believe with complete faith in the coming of the Messiah? So he said, well, we were in the barracks. They made sure to keep us a distance from the gas chambers. But we knew what was happening. But in the barracks, all the time, that song, other songs, holiday songs, Shabbat songs, prayers, Moda'ani, Shema, Kaddish, all the time. So I said, I'm an American boy. I can't even imagine what you guys went through. But I have to ask this question. Doesn't it seem a little insane? Here God is completely concealed, has forsaken his own people. They're being killed because they're the children of God, because they're God's chosen people. God is ignoring it. Shouldn't they be angry? And not only are they not angry, they're singing his praises? Does it make sense? Were they completely in denial? And the response that I received, that I've heard time and again, no, it was not denial. It wasn't escape. It wasn't some childish naivete. It was declaring a statement that would echo through history. And what is that statement? There was declaring, you can take our bodies, but you can't take our souls. You can take our lives, but you can't take our faith and our values. And if it won't be us, it will be our children. And if it won't be our children, it will be our grandchildren. We will prevail. Because the narrative continues. We are souls. The souls can never be killed. So it wasn't a surrender. It wasn't denial. It wasn't just escaping to God. It was actually accessing the only thing they had left. Everything else was stripped from them. Like one survivor once told me of a terrorist attack, that you don't know how powerful faith and trust are until you have nothing but that. Everything's been stripped. And they accessed that deeper strength. And they went with that. And that remained, that burning ember remained even when the building burned down, in the hearts and souls of their children, or the survivors themselves and their children and grandchildren. So despite how terrible it was, and our blood boils, but that doesn't define us. You're not going to define me. As they say about some other, a Nazi, a real cruel Nazi, was about to kill a Jew. And the Jews say, may I say something before you kill me? He says, go ahead. And he started whispering. He started quietly reciting the last final prayers. And the Nazi looked at him, what are you saying? He says, I'm thanking my God. What are you thanking your God for, you miserable Jew? I'm in control here. Where's your God? And he says, I'm thanking God that he didn't create me like you. You see what that is, the spirit? All can only emerge with a challenge. Now, I'm talking, of course, extremes. Bringing it back to our story, to the losses and failures and setbacks that we have that are far less than that. These 4 case studies, if you can put it that way, these 4 studies in history teach you that formula of that, the 5 parts that I mentioned, the 5 points. And to sum up again, the 5 points. Don't let your emotions control you. You have to embrace yourself and be able to get some control over the situation. Number 2, challenges will always bring out something deeper within you. Number 3, you have a soul. Number 4, there's no challenge that does not have the strength to deal with. And number 5, there's a bigger narrative. When you can focus on that and remember these stories of history, Mitzrayim, Chet Egel, the sin of the golden calf in Yom Kippur, the Middle Ages composure, the resilience and the strength to see beyond that even the Holocaust survivors experienced. That gives you the ability to access yourself. Learn about your soul. Emotionally experience it. And don't wait till there's a setback and failure. The best is always to be preemptive approach. When a person does that, then when a situation comes and the storm comes your way, you'll be able to navigate. And ultimately, turn those challenges, those liabilities into assets to become stronger through the process. This has been part 1 of this course, dealing with loss and failure, the Chassidic approach to coping with challenges and setbacks. Please join me next week for part 2, the spiritual dynamics. Simon Jacobson from the Meaningful Life Center, meaningfullife.com, where you can find these programs and as well as many other offerings. Please take advantage of them. Share your feedback, comments. It's always an honor. May you be blessed to have the least amount of pain and loss, but when something comes your way, turn it into something greater. God bless you. Be well.